obviously tonight, huge game in the college football world, Clemson and Alabama. We got thoughts over at BangTheBook.com with my preview and also some game props, player props, all that type of stuff. And, again, as I'll talk about here in this next segment when we get Thor Nystrom on the line, very sharp line, I think in a lot of respects. So use those props to your advantage as an alternative way to bet the game, because I think that's something that can be really, really effective for you here at this time of the year. And as I said, we'll expand on that here more as we bring on a new voice and a new guest on Bang the Book Radio. That is Thor Nystrom from Rotoworld. Thor, how's it going today, man?
Oh, it's going so well. This is an honor, Adam.
The honor is all mine, man. I know that you and I have been talking a little bit more here. I know that you are a regular Bang the Book Radio listener, at least for our college football segments. Certainly appreciate that. Glad to get you on the program here. And, hey, you know what? No better day to do it than with the national championship game, Clemson and Alabama. Alabama 5.5-point favorite. Total on this game has come down now into the 57.5 range. Thor, I know that you've got some pretty strong thoughts here on the spread for this game.
Yeah, I do. You want me to jump right in?
Absolutely. Dive right in.
Yeah. Well, so I'm on Clemson in this game. And let me say, first of all, for the listeners out there, I'm a listener too. Okay. I'm not a pro handicapper. I'm a writer at Rotoworld, but this is one of the shows that I listen to all the time, to learn and to get better and everything like that. Like, I know all of Adam's guests, between Kyle Hunter and Brian Leonard and Tony George and Rolf Michaels and Brad Powers. I mean, like, it was part of my weekly routine, but I want to make that caveat off the jump. However, that all being said, with all the work I did into this game, I did settle on Clemson. I'll be taking Clemson plus the points and also Clemson outright. And Adam, I'm curious to get your take on this. And then as we go through the props, I guess though, just to sort of like start out and like set the table and everything. For me, the neutralizer here is not Alabama's offense. It's not Alabama's passing game. It's not Tua. It's not any of that stuff. For me, the neutralizer in this game is Clemson's defensive line, even without Dexter Lawrence, and specifically the pass rush. I mean, everybody knows the two first-rounders on the edge, or maybe one of them is going to go on day two, but they also have a five-star true freshman behind them who is perhaps one of the best defensive backups in the nation, and so they always have two elite, fresh edge rushers coming off of the edge. Clemson also plays with 5 defensive backs at all times, and I know one of the guys they moved up to linebacker is a guy that you like in the props later, so we can kind of wait to talk about Isaiah Simmons, but he was a guy who was a safety before, and they moved him up to weak side linebacker this season. He also plays nickel back, and he's going to be a guy that's really important for this too. But that's my first thought, and we can get into like the granular of this, but that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I think it's such an intriguing matchup because, I think a lot of people want to look back at the previous games that we've had. And I know that you mentioned that in your phenomenal write-up over at Rotoworld, your 2-page write-up that you have over there. Clemson covered in the first 2 games. Of course, won one of them outright. And then last year, just not a good show. And last year was the weakest Clemson team because of Kelly Bryant. And this isn't a knock on his talent. It's just that you're not scared of him throwing the football. Trevor Lawrence is a different kind of guy. You're scared of him throwing the football. So Alabama has that to worry about on defense. But to your point about the defensive line, this Clemson defense is that good because of depth, because they continue to recruit at such a high level. And that's a big deal here in this game. And I think it's a corollary into one of the props that I do like a ton in this game. But I like the point that you brought up there that Clemson's going to be fresh on the defensive line if they're able to substitute. And that's the thing is that for Tua, I mean, very, very good quarterback, very accurate type of guy, but we know that his mobility has been in question because of that ankle.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And that goes back into the pass rush thing. Like what is the one thing that reliably takes down or can cause turbulence for Alabama's aerial show? I would suggest to the listeners out there, it's not necessarily having the best defensive backfield in the nation. I mean, certainly that would help. Obviously, it's the pass rush. It's getting into the backfield. It's screwing up the timing. And the point that I'm trying to make in the column, this goes with several different things. But Adam, to your point, Tua's ankle has not been sound, not just, since the Georgia game. We saw this throughout the season where Tua would be hobbling around. He's a guy that if you can hit him, I don't know if this is going to be something that's an issue throughout his career because of his frame or whatever, but this is an issue that we've seen throughout this season. Obviously, he's still not 100% healthy. I mean, Alabama will just outright admit that to you. And so when you think about, like, this idea of Tua now he's scrambling around, now he's under duress, now he's out of the pocket. When you think about that aerial show and you just go through your head, in every single game that they played, you go back to the SEC schedule against some of those teams they played and whatnot, when Alabama's scary, when they are clicking, when they are, a terrifying show to behold, it's always when Tua's just sitting back there and he's got a little bit of time and his receivers have time for the routes to develop. And the point I want to make to the listeners is Alabama's receiving corps is awesome. Absolutely. Like, it's insane. It's sick. I'm not going to, like, bash it at all, but it is missing one thing that I think would be, like, super valuable in this matchup. And that's this. Well, Alabama's got like 4 stud receivers and they also have a stud tight end that can both block and catch. The one thing they don't have is like a lanky outside monster on the outside. And Clemson's got these in spades, specifically with T. Higgins and Justin Ross on the outside. But all of Alabama's receivers are, you're talking about like, 6-foot guys, under 200 pounds. They're all speedsters, all sick athletes. If you give them time to get into space, they find a sliver of space. Tua has his time, hits them on the numbers. They're gone. Whether it's Waddle, whether it's Judy, Ruggs is around for the possession stuff. And obviously Devontae Smith, we know what he did last year, in this game. So, but the key point being they need time to get into their routes. And Tua's also a guy who's far better when he's not under duress. You think about a guy who, like, when Tua is bad Tua, it's typically because he's being pressured, he's running around, and he's not a quarterback who will say die. He's not a guy who, like, if you flush him out of the pocket, Tua's not just going to sort of, start to run towards the sideline and then sort of calmly throw the ball, out of bounds. That's not his game. He's going to keep running around. He's going to keep, looking downfield. And if he even sees a sliver of something, he's chucking the ball up. Even if he's seeing something, we've seen him make some baffling mistakes in the past. And of course, we've also seen him make some of the most incredible plays, that we saw this year. And then of course, in the second half of last year's title game. But that's why I think it's so important. If you get pressure on him, not only are you sort of leveraging the injury that he already has and making him play into the worst of his skill set, which is, running around under duress, like, oh, I can't give up on this play. Like we have to make a profit on this play. Let's chuck it downfield and all this kind of stuff. But Alabama also does not have receivers that excel in contested situations. If Tua gets into those situations where he's running around, he just chucks it up. He doesn't have a T. Higgins to go up, and sky up there where he can beat a guy or 2 guys, by getting higher than them for the rebound. Judy's not going to do that. Ruggs isn't going to do that. Waddle is certainly not going to do that. And so for all those reasons, that's why when I kept thinking about this game, and I want to make another point too, I was on Alabama in last year's game because of the reason you mentioned, Brian. I was on Clemson in the 2 previous ones, and I love the point you made because for me, it almost is that simple where now Clemson's got a good quarterback again. I mean, betting against Bryant last year was pretty easy for me. But this is a different story, and because of Clemson's defensive line, even without Dexter Lawrence, I just think that they can neutralize some of the things that contribute to Alabama's special sauce on offense.
Well, and what I love about this game, and I understand that maybe there's, some Alabama-Clemson exhaustion because they're playing for the 4th time in 4 years in the college football playoff, 3rd time for the title. But the reason being is because of these specific matchups that we're talking about. Because you've got Sunday players at damn near every position for both of these teams, and you have these individual matchups where there are individual matchups that can decide this game, and you've got some of the best coaching staffs in the country trying to look at how to exploit any little advantage that they have. That's why I love this game so much and why, I probably won't have a play on the spread for this game. My power ratings number was Clemson plus 4.5. I know you wrote in the article you were looking at an adjusted number of Clemson plus 1.5. So, certainly an overlay there for you, and I certainly understand why you're looking to take the Clemson side as a result. Not just because you've got, an adjusted number where it shows value, but also you took this down to a matchup level, to a schematic level, and then decided, there are too many check marks in the Clemson categories for me to avoid, playing this game. The thing that I wonder about here, and this is something that we haven't touched on yet, you mentioned Tua, obviously, trying to avoid the rush, limited mobility, things of that sort. How effective is this Alabama running game? Because that may be the X factor here. We think of Alabama as a dominant team running the football. They were a better passing team than rushing team this year. So from that standpoint, how effective can the Crimson Tide running game be to ease some of that pressure off of Tua?
I don't think it's going to be very effective at all. And that's, a big part of my handicap with this game and why I think, everything gets leveraged onto Tua. Well, I mean, that's the oversimplified take. Really, everything gets leveraged onto Alabama's offensive line and pass protection in this game. But a part of the reason why, I came to that sort of understanding of the game in my handicap was because I just don't think Alabama's going to be able to run. I mean, nobody runs on Clemson. It's just not really an option. And, I know people are out there thinking, well, Alabama's got 3 NFL running backs. They absolutely do. Damian Harris obviously is really good. Najee Harris is good. And Josh Jacobs might be the best of the bunch. So they do have options there, and it's not a bad blocking run line as well in the Alabama offensive line. It's just that Clemson's next level dominant against the run, even without Dexter Lawrence. I mean, heading into the Notre Dame game, you were thinking, well, without Dexter, and now they're going against Dexter Williams, who's had a bunch of good games in a row since he came back from suspension. Maybe they could do something. No, they didn't do anything. I forgot if it was 35 rushing attempts for 85 yards total. I think Dexter got held in the low 50s. Dexter Williams got held in the low 50s. So I just don't think that Alabama is going to be able to get much going on the ground. For me, if I'm going into this game, if I'm Nick Saban, what I want to do initially is be extremely aggressive from the jump, in terms of passing. And I'm basically trying to figure out, sometimes I think of these matchups like an MMA matchup, and the different skill sets and what would be the way that the fighters would go in if the other fighter had this specific skill and this specific weakness and whatnot. And, for this game, what you're trying to identify, if you're on the Alabama side, is where exactly in that Clemson secondary, what can we start to pick on? If I'm Nick Saban, how can I play Lincoln Riley from last, Saturday or whatever? How can I find the Patrick Surtain on the other team that I can pick on in coverage? And that's what I'm trying to, figure out. If I'm them, I don't really try to run a ton initially, outside of just keeping people off of Tua, because I don't think it's going to be very effective as is. I think it's just going to be wasting downs more or less.
All right, so let's look at this from the other side then. I mean, obviously it sounds like you think Alabama is going to have some issues with this Clemson defense, and certainly there's a strong statistical profile and just an outright talent profile for the Clemson defense. What about this Clemson offense against the Alabama defense? How do you feel like that stacks up?
Oh, man, it's another really interesting handicap. I think they match up okay, the Clemson offense. Here's what I like. Okay. Clemson's offense can be more balanced going in, period, right? Because Clemson's defensive line is that trump card against the Alabama run game. So Alabama, if Alabama is not effectively passing, especially early on, I don't know that they can win this game. Their passing game needs to be awesome. Whereas with Clemson, they can do both because Alabama's defense does not have that trump card. I mean, I suppose someone out there could be screaming, well, what about Quinnen and what about Raekwon or whatever in the middle? Alabama's got awesome defensive tackles. Quinnen Williams he might be the best player in the nation, irregardless of everything else. He's probably the best player on Alabama's team. Sorry to the Tua supporters. He's a stud and everything, but Alabama's defense this year, it's not the same. Last year's Alabama team that won the title, basically, to me, they were 95% of this Clemson team. That Alabama team was number 1 in the nation in S&P Plus defense, and their offense was in the 20s. Well, Clemson's, 1 defense this year, and their offense is 5. So, that team was a little bit down. But, this team is different, right? And so it just causes different things, as far as the matchups go. So, I think that Dabo can go in contrast to Saban, where I think Saban initially, again, aggressive. Let's try to find in that Clemson secondary. Let's try to find what Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M did in the second half when Kellen Mond threw for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns or whatever it is, and these other teams that have had aerial success on them. And with Dabo, I think that they can do both. I think they're going to see with Etienne what can they do with Eddie? And, like, are they going to try to avoid the middle and go to the outside? You know, you avoid Quinnen and Raekwon. Christian Miller, the outside linebacker for Alabama, might not be playing. Are you going to try to stress the perimeter, go at the fact that Alabama's defense allows a lot of explosive runs, and Clemson's one of the elite teams in the nation running the ball? Are you going to try to do a little bit more inside than we think heading in? Clemson's a very clever zone blocking team. You know, you look at their offensive linemen, and none of them really jump off the page. Like, some of these guys have been around for a while. Like Mitch Hyatt's been around forever. You know, he was protecting Deshaun Watson back in the day. Pollard, like, you know, a lot of these guys or whatever. But, you know, none of them really jump off the page. But they are more effective, you know, as a group than you would think, you know, just from like looking at an NFL draft perspective. Clemson was a team that was effective running the ball inside this season. I'm not sure if that's going to be the case here with all the monsters inside for Alabama. But again, the thing that they have going for them is that they can do either. Right from the jump, Clemson can be more unpredictable on offense because they can both run and pass. And, I think they're also going to try to suss out early on where those weaknesses are. Surtain's the obvious one. I mean, he's the one that everyone's been talking about. I'm sure we're going to see, you know, Clemson trying to target him, you know, whether it's, Surtain ends up being across from Higgins or whether he ends up being across from Ross. And then, you know, just seeing where else they can pick at that Alabama defense. But that Alabama defense has dropped to number 12 S&P Plus from number 1 last year. And so it's just a far different Alabama team that, you know, a lot more of the burden is on that offense than it has in years past.
Now, I will say this. Obviously, you're building a strong case for Clemson, and you certainly did that in your mega preview as well, which, once again, phenomenal piece over at Rotoworld. Highly recommend that everyone goes and checks that out. But we do have to throw some sort of devil's advocacy in here. And I thought the stat you mentioned about Trevor Lawrence with regards to a key injury for Notre Dame in the semifinal was really, really strong, and I think that's worth mentioning here.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And just to set up Adam's question there for everybody, so heading into the playoff, and by the way, I want to say this too. I got the Oklahoma pick right last week, but I got the Notre Dame Clemson one very wrong. I stepped into a trap with Notre Dame, and a part of my reasoning there was this idea that Lawrence hadn't played an elite defense all season. You know, he's a true freshman. He put up awesome stats. Like, you know, Clemson had beaten every team that it had played when Lawrence had started and finished a game by 20 points or more. You know, and everything was great. The only issue was the best defense that they'd played leading up into that Notre Dame game was Boston College, who at the time I believe was like S&P Plus number 28 defense. Like, you know, Boston College has a solid defense. You know, they have some NFL players on it, you know, specifically on the edge and at safety, but, you know, it's not any like elite shakes or anything, but Notre Dame is, you know, Notre Dame has a top 5 defense. And of course, Lawrence played very good in that game. But as Adam was mentioning, it's a little bit, I almost don't want to say misleading, but it's absolutely a tidbit that people need to know. So Notre Dame has this stud cornerback, Julian Love, you know, a guy who the NFL loves to use the obvious stupid pun. And when Love was out in the second quarter, he suffered like a minor head injury. And then, you know, Notre Dame before halftime in that second quarter was trying to get him through the concussion protocol. And Brian Kelly talked about this after the game where, you know, Julian Love was having some issues getting through it before halftime. So he ends up sitting out the entire second quarter, but he plays most of the rest of the game. During the second quarter, Trevor Lawrence went 13 of 15 for 229 yards and 3 touchdowns. In the 3 quarters that Love played, so the first, third, and fourth, Lawrence went 14 of 24 for 98 yards and 0 touchdowns. And the caveat I need to add there too to the caveat is that, you know, Clemson's offense was a little bit off and playing conservatively early on, you know, similarly, I suppose to Oklahoma against Alabama, where they were just sort of, you know, I don't know if it was nerves or just feeling things out or whatever. The first quarter was a bit more sluggish. Obviously, the second quarter was ridiculous. You know, it was like Notre Dame. It's like when you're playing your buddy like in NBA 2K and like, you know, things start going wrong for him and he just goes on tilt and you end up having like a 40 to 15 quarter or whatever. And that's what happened there. But then in the second half, Clemson had opened the thing up so much that, you know, their offense was super conservative there in the second half. So they were just trying to kill the thing out. But it is still worth mentioning that, you know, Lawrence did go off, but predominantly in that second quarter when Love was not playing.
All right, so let's talk about some props here. I think it's a fantastic thing to keep in mind. And, of course, we'll see, you know, how Trevor Lawrence fares here against this Alabama defense. But The prop market, I think, is the way to attack this game, as I mentioned just before we got you on the line here. While I do think that you made a strong case about Clemson, and obviously from a power rating standpoint, you do like Clemson in this spot, it's pretty close to my number, and I think this total really could go either way. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a 40 to 37 shootout, or a game that ends 27-24, something like that. But the props, there's just so many prop options out there. So with regards to Trevor Lawrence, you mentioned this, and I certainly agree that this is a massive concern. If he gets hurt, with Kelly Bryant no longer around, that may be curtains for Clemson. That would be a very bad situation. But also,
100%.
How do you beat Alabama? You have a dual threat quarterback. You have a guy that they have to worry about running the football some. I bet Trevor Lawrence over 14.5 rushing yards, and then over at BetOnline and some of the other places that do player props, they have an at least prop. So at least 15 yards, at least 16 yards, at least 17 yards. I bet it all the way up to at least 20 yards, because I think that has to be a wrinkle here for Clemson, just to get Alabama to respect that a little bit and open more throwing lanes for a kid that's easily playing the biggest game of his life.
1,000%. Yeah. Adam, I saw your column this morning. That may end up being one of my favorite props. I haven't gone all the way through the entire thing and locked out my bets, but I love that one. I mean, this was something, when I was just thinking about the matchup, I they're the last thing. I do the spread, I do the total, all that kind of stuff. And in my head, I see the game playing out, and then I start looking at the props. But I love the Lawrence one. It's obvious for a lot of people out there listening, but Alabama, of course, with Nick Saban over the last 5-6 years here, what they struggle with specifically is dual threat quarterbacks in spread offenses. Now, Lawrence is technically a pocket passer, but that really doesn't do his game justice. The recruiting profiles, he's more athletic than that. And Clemson hasn't asked him to run a lot, which makes a lot of sense, because after Bryant left, like you were mentioning, if Lawrence gets injured, now you fall down to Bryce. I mean, the season prospects we're gonna dim, and if that happens in this game, like you're mentioning, Clemson's done if Lawrence gets injured. But the running aspect is really important, and just to give people an idea of this that haven't heard about some of this stuff with Alabama's defense in the past, I'm going to give you the list of quarterbacks and offense type that have beaten Alabama outright since 2012. So you have the Texas A&M team with Johnny Manziel, obviously, is a spread offense in 2012. 2013, they lost to Nick Marshall and Auburn spread. They lost to Trevor Knight spread the next year. Bo Wallace and Ole Miss's spread. They lost to Cardale Jones in the 2014 playoff spread offense. Chad Kelly in 2015, another loss to Ole Miss spread offense. Then, of course, the Deshaun Watson. And then last year, Jarrett Stidham in the spread. And so typically that's what gives them issues. And we saw this last week with Kyler Murray and Oklahoma's offense. And so, for Dabo and his staff, who just watches all kinds of film and is always looking for an edge against the opponent, of course, those guys know Alabama probably better than a lot of the SEC teams know Alabama at this point. I mean, when Dabo Swinney's preparing for the season, I think he's preparing for Alabama as much as anyone. I think that's why he pulled the plug on Kelly Bryant as soon as he did, even though obviously Clemson was undefeated at the time. They beat A&M, like all this different stuff. And when they're sitting down and looking at that defense, Alabama's defense is designed in a similar way to Michigan to beat offenses in a phone booth. That's what they want to do, and that's always been sort of the idea. And obviously in the past, much better defense. This year it's regressed a little bit, but the profile of it remains the same. And so you can catch them with their pants down every now and again, I'll take the listeners back to that Ohio State Michigan game where, everybody thought that, Michigan's defense was just going to, do whatever. And they kind of got ripped. You can do the same things that Ohio State did to Michigan, to Alabama's defense. And Alabama's defense is worse than Michigan's this year. But, getting their linebackers to defend in space, getting them to worry about the quarterback runs, all that different kind of stuff. Just get people in space. And the Lawrence run thing, I think is important. You got to be very careful again, because like Adam said, if Lawrence gets injured, this game is over. So, you can't get too cute with this. But if it's me, I'm calling at least a few design quarterback runs, because I've seen it on film. Reliably, we can steal yards from Alabama by doing this, especially when they're in specific alignments. We get the specific pre-snap read, whatnot. And the other thing is I'm telling Lawrence, listen, kid, because, this isn't something he's done all year. I'm telling him, listen, kid, if you see them in man coverage, and you're back there for like 3 or 4 seconds, and you just can't see anybody open, you got to understand immediately, like, Quinnen is coming. He will be here any second, even if you don't see him in your face right now. He is going to get there. He's like coming for John Connor at all times. And so if you're Lawrence and you see man coverage, you see some of those Alabama, defenders running downfield with their back to you, and a couple seconds have ticked off and no one is open, run. Don't think about it, run, because you're going to be able to steal yardage there too. So I think, Adam, did you say the number was 14.5 that you saw this morning?
Yeah, I saw 14.5, a little bit of extra juice, minus 114.
I take it. Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned looking at Alabama to be aggressive early on in this game. I fully agree with that. I think one of the things that they want to do in this game is run with a lot of tempo, keep Clemson from substituting on the defensive line as much as they can. I do like Tua over 21.5 completions, as I mentioned last week on the show with Brad Powers. Sounds like something that you would be in agreement with as well. But I know you said you haven't had a chance to dive through all the props as of yet, Thor, but any of the ones that you have seen here so far, anything we haven't talked about that kind of stands out to you?
Sure. Yeah. I like the Etienne over of rushing yards, whatever it is. I think it was like in the low 80s when I saw it last time. I like that one because, again, Alabama's defensive front, while it's very good, specifically a defensive tackle, they struggle with a couple different things against the run. I mentioned it before, too many explosive runs given up. They also struggle with stuff rate, which is just like a stunning thing to see on their S&P Plus page because they get so much penetration, but they don't often, make tackles behind the line against running teams, at least at a top 40 clip. And so if Etienne just breaks off one long run like he does in almost every game, he's going to be very close to that total, just once. And I think he's going to have success. Like I kind of like Etienne to challenge 100 yards here. And so I like that one. I love the under on whatever Damian Harris's rushing total is. I don't even think Damian Harris is going to be like their most important back in this game. To me, that's Josh Jacobs. His skill set is more diverse, and that's what you need here. Like, you need a guy on the field at all times that can go out there, can do a little pass blocking, can go out on routes, like everything like that. So I think Jacobs will be out there more, and the only chance that Damian Harris has to get over 60 rushing yards, it would take a kind of game where Alabama's offensive line's playing awesome. They neutralize Clemson's pass rush. Tua's clicking. He's hitting his passes early. They open up a lead. At that point, you could start to use Damian and try to, grind him and grind the clock down. But, even still, you'd still be going up against, one of the best run defenses we've seen in the last decade. So I don't like that matchup at all. So I take the under on that. What are some of the other ones you're looking at, Adam?
Yeah, Damian Harris under 50.5 at 5 dimes minus $1.30, 49.5. Excuse me, at Bet Online minus $1.20. One of them that I looked at, it's a little bit chalky. But offense scores all touchdowns minus 180. I mean, these are two quarterbacks that combined to throw 8 interceptions during the regular season and, of course, through the semifinals, and then only 19 sacks between the two. So these guys do take care of the football for the most part. I don't think on special teams with all the 4 and 5 stars that we really see too many dramatic breakdowns. You can get that minus 180 at 5 dimes for the offense to score all touchdowns.
Dude, this is why I like your work so much because, I read that column this morning and I got to that, some of these other ones I'd seen and I liked and I agreed with you. And that one is one that I hadn't seen. I hadn't even thought about it, but it just makes so much intuitive sense. And you made an airtight case in that column, but the only other things that I'll mention, these offenses take care of the ball. Lawrence threw the fewest turnover-worthy throws in the entire FBS this year, according to Pro Football Focus. He also doesn't take stupid sacks or, makes stupid fumbles or whatever. And then the other thing, with regards to your special teams thing, both of these teams aren't good on special teams. The only team that would be a threat, I think, to run one back would be Bama, because that's the only thing that their special teams is good at, specifically their kick return unit. However, Clemson's only special team strength is their kickoff coverage unit. And so, if those things could merely just cancel each other out, I think you'd be fine there. I wouldn't expect there to be a special teams touchdown. And this isn't something I would have said in past years. And in fact, in that, the year that Kenyon Drake ran that 95-yarder back in the fourth quarter to help Alabama, I think that was the 45-40 Alabama win where they staved off Clemson there. that was a year where Clemson had a super bad special teams, but Alabama was better. And so, that was one thing. I bet on Clemson in that game, but I made the point in my write-up, like, this is like a very specific, tangible area of the game where Alabama could absolutely steal points. But in this game, both, like I say, both special teams units are bad. They're each good at one thing, but those two things are probably going to neutralize themselves out. And then, as far as the defensive touchdowns, it is kind of hard for me to visualize it. I think the only, outside of, just like an act of God kind of fumble, the only thing within the normal flow of the game that I could even think of that could lead to one would be one of those things I was talking about before, like with Tua flushed out of the pocket. Now he's running around. He's not really sure what to do, but he's not going to throw it out of bounds. And he just sort of flings one, and, a guy like Trayvon Mullen steps in front of it. But I don't like the odds of that, and especially the odds that you cited, Adam. I really like that one.
All right, I know we're running a little bit long here, but there's one more prop I want to talk about with you. And I saw this one over at Bet Online. I think it's really fascinating. Points scored in Clemson versus Alabama is minus 125 against points scored in Super Bowl 53, plus 105 on the takeback. Obviously, the total here for this game, in the 57.5 range now as it's come down. With the Bears and the Ravens being knocked out of the NFL playoffs, that prop bet all of a sudden gets really, really interesting.
Yeah, it really does. And especially like with, in this game, when the Bama Clemson game, when I first started looking at it, I really liked the over, just thinking about it, because both these defenses, their weak spots are in their secondaries, their strengths are on the defensive line. So I figured, it's got to be a pass heavy script on both sides. And I figured Bama was going to come out aggressive. They did well. Well, now Clemson's got to get a little bit more aggressive. We'll see some points, whatever. And then the total, suspiciously drops, right at the start of the week. I don't know if it's down 3 points. I think it was around 61 before, and now it's fallen, and it keeps sort of falling a little bit. And my spidey senses just went up with it, where if you've done this long enough, you see something like that, and you're like, okay, I know what kind of money comes in early on the week on an under on a public game like this. I do not want to be going up against those guys. So, with regards to a thing like that, I would have loved, and maybe I even still like it, as far as the Bama Clemson one, because you start to think, I think you made the point in the column of if the Rams and the Chiefs meet up, okay, well now we have a total that will challenge it. But outside of that, Adam, how many other matchups where if these two teams made the Super Bowl and you had previously bet the Alabama Clemson side of that prop, how many other matchups can you think of where you would be terrified that you had the Alabama Clemson over ticket in that prop?
I guess the Chiefs have to make it out of the AFC. That's pretty much it for me. I don't even think Indianapolis, as good as Indy's offense is, it's just not as explosive from a big play standpoint with 2 weeks to prep. I would have to get the Chiefs out of the AFC, and I would have to get either the Rams or maybe the Eagles, potentially. I don't even think the Saints give up, a ton of points in that game. So it's hard. It's hard to see a path where the NFL game goes higher. Then again, 5 of the last 6 Super Bowls over 50 points, 3 of the last 6 Super Bowls over 60 points. So it's a scary prop bet to make, but I think it leads to a lot of interesting discussion at the very least.
Yeah, it really does. And, just thinking about it here, I'm just sort of running the math in my head. I was thinking, well, maybe I'll just lay off the total. I did have a lean, but then this stuff happened, and so maybe I don't have a lean anymore, whatever. That one might be a sort of interesting hedge for people out there who are like me, who did lean over, but then they sort of got spooked by some of this line movement. There was this talk that the weather could be bad in Santa Clara tonight, like last week. I don't actually think that's going to end up being the case, but just because of that, this one would be an interesting hedge because you don't necessarily need to hit the over to win that bet.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think it's a really, really smart way to look at it. I think you've looked at this game, the national championship here, in a lot of smart ways. Again, I very highly encourage everyone to go check out the mega preview over at Rotoworld that Thor put together, along with some help from some of his colleagues there with regards to the draft and some prospects to keep an eye on, stuff like that. But really, really good piece over there, Thor. I know you're primarily the college football guy over there. What are you going to do after this, with this being the last game of the year?
Oh, we're jumping to the NFL draft after this. So, every season I go all the way up through the national title game and everything, and then never think about it from an NFL draft perspective. But then right when this game gets done, I put my NFL draft hat on until the end of April, and I get to dive fresh into that. You get, Adam, you and I were talking about this over DMs, but, every season you do this so much and you're just grinding. And, sometimes you need that second wind, and I got it when we started bowl season. I certainly got it today, even though I'm just running on fumes. But my gosh, being Christmas night and everything, and stuff like that. And now we move, after this game, this epic game. And by the way, to your point before, man, people who are complaining about Alabama, Clemson, get out of here. Not college football fans to me. We've got Balboa Creed tonight. We've got Celtics, Lakers. For my generation of college football fans, this is the thing. These are two concurrent dynasties going head to head, and they just so happen to meet, in this space and time and dabble with his Alabama connection, like all that different stuff. Like, it's just so cool. So I'm super duper looking forward to this game, obviously. And then, after this, I'm super duper looking forward to just diving headfirst in the NFL draft.
Again, Thor Nystrom, who's working and fine at Rotoworld, at ThorKU, THORKU on Twitter. Great follow. Definitely want to make sure that you're following him tonight and as we go throughout the draft process, and, of course, on into college football for next season as well. Man, I know I kept you a little long, but had a great time with it. Really enjoyed it, and maybe next year we'll make this a little bit more of a regular thing for you.
Oh, I'd love it, Adam. I've just been pinching myself the last 30 minutes, just having listened to the pod so much, all throughout the season, and now I'm like on it. It's like the strangest thing, and I'm just tickled pink. Like, thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a little bit short notice too, so I greatly appreciate that. Again, Thor Nystrom from Rotoworld. Enjoy the game tonight, man. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much, Adam. You too. Bye-bye.